Hi, I'm Eleanor 58, and I used to believe family was forever. I spent my life as a housewife, cooking, cleaning, planning every little thing to keep my husband and our daughter Julia happy. When my husband passed away last year, cancer took him fast and left me empty. But I told myself it was okay because I still had Julia. She was married to Mark and they offered me a place to stay. Well, Julia did. Mark barely looked up from his phone when I moved in. I didn't want to be a burden, so I kept quiet. I thought love meant sacrifice. But what I didn't know was that sacrifice could turn you invisible. And soon I'd find out just how invisible they believed I was. I still remember the smell of that night. Chicken pot pie, buttery and warm, filling up the kitchen like a promise. I baked it for Mark because it was his favorite. I thought maybe if I cooked something he loved, he'd see me. Maybe he'd smile, say, "Thank you," or at least nod. Julia sat at the table scrolling her phone, her face lit up by a glow that wasn't mine. Mark cracked open his beer, took a long sip, and silence pressed down on us like a stone. Then out of nowhere, he looked up at me. His eyes were flat dead like puddles left after a storm. "You know," he said, swirling the beer in his glass, "maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary." My heart paused mid-beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. He smirked, that cold twist of his mouth that always made me feel small. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing. We didn't sign up to feed an extra mouth forever." The words sliced right through me so clean, it took a second for the pain to catch up. I turned to Julia, my daughter, my blood, my everything. She didn't meet my eyes. She just mumbled, "Maybe it's best for everyone." My breath caught. For a moment, the world blurred. The room spun gently around me like I was underwater, and everything sounded muffled. I stood up without a word. My legs felt hollow. I walked to my room, packed my life into 2 suitcases, one for clothes, one for memories. As I zipped them shut, the tears didn't come. They waited. Tears are cowards like that. They wait until you're alone. I left their apartment just past midnight. The wind was sharp against my cheeks as I sat on the curb outside their building, 2 suitcases beside me, watching my breath turn to ghost clouds in the dark. I waited for Julia to come down, to say something, anything. But no one came. Mark didn't even bother pretending to care. I sat there for an hour until my phone battery died, along with the last flicker of hope in my chest. That night, I checked into a motel down by the highway. The kind of place where the curtains are too thin and the carpet smells like spilled beer and old cigarettes. I lay on the bed staring up at the stained ceiling, feeling like the entire world had gone quiet just to hear me crumble. In the morning, I texted Julia, "I understand. I love you always." She didn't reply. Days turned into weeks. I tried applying for jobs, cashier, receptionist, cleaning staff, but no one wanted a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent work history. The loneliness was a slow suffocation. The shame was worse. I had given my life to them, every breath, every second, and now I was nothing. One evening I opened the old box of keepsakes I'd brought from home. Photographs, letters, fragments of a life that no longer belonged to me. At the bottom was a small leather diary, my mother's. I didn't remember packing it. Maybe I never meant to. Maybe it found its way to me because it knew I needed it. I opened it with trembling hands. At first, it was mundane grocery lists, weather notes, prayers. Then I turned to a page, dated June. He came again today, said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Eleanor will never know. She must never know. I just pray one day she understands how much I loved her, even if she was born out of mistake and desire. My chest seized. I read the words again and again, until they burned into my brain. She was talking about me. I flipped through pages frantically, searching for more. Hints, secret meetings, cash payments she tried to refuse. His initials, HJS, then another entry. He said if anything happened to him, he'd make sure Eleanor had something. It won't be official, too dangerous. But he promised a trust. A letter. His lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, would know. Mr. Goldstein. That name. I'd seen it before. My heart thundered. My lungs felt too small to hold the air I needed. For 2 days, I lived in the motel's computer room, searching online until I found him. Leonard Goldstein, retired estate lawyer in Dallas. I didn't call. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Instead, I wrote a letter. Handwritten, desperate ink, smudged by tears I didn't even feel falling. 2 weeks later, I got a call. I always wondered if you'd reach out one day. His voice cracked when I said my mother's name. There's something you need to see. The next morning, I boarded a Greyhound to Dallas. My suitcases were half packed in case it was a scam. But the moment I stepped into his office, lined with silent books and dust motes, floating like ghosts in sunlight, I knew it was real. He handed me a sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed with time, the handwriting looping and elegant. It was from Harold James Sterling, the founder of Sterling Energy, the man whose initials haunted my mother's diary, to my daughter, Eleanor Louise. I couldn't read it all at once. My vision blurred with tears. He admitted everything. The affair, the regret, the silent love, the promise. In the event of my death, I have ensured a portion of my personal assets, untraceable through my estate, are to be delivered to you via Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood. Though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death. Mr. Goldstein slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank account statements and investment portfolio property titles. Total value over $1 million. I didn't scream. I didn't smile. I just sat there silent, as a prayer letting the truth settle into my bones, like warmth after years in the cold. They thought they erased me, but they had no idea. I wasn't erased. I was just getting started. Mark always looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Disgusted, irritated. Like I was a stain he couldn't scrub out no matter how hard he tried. Sometimes as he walked past me in the narrow hallway, the scent of his cologne sharp and cold, I'd hear him mutter under his breath, "Freeloader." The word landed like a slap across my cheek every single time. Sharp, precise, cruel. A truth he carved into me with casual flicks of his tongue. I would glance at Julia, then my daughter, the child I carried inside me for 9 aching months. The girl I raised on single paychecks and stale coffee. The woman I still saw as 5 years old with scraped knees and tearful eyes. I would look at her and hope that she would say something. Anything. That she would turn to him and remind him I was her mother. That I had a name. That I had worth. That I had a place in this world, beyond the sagging couch in their guest room and the chipped mug I kept washing to feel useful. But she would just sigh, tuck a perfectly highlighted strand of hair behind her ear and mumble, "He's just stressed, Mom. Work's been rough lately." And that was it. Excuses. Always excuses. Excuses that silenced the small scream inside me every time he called me worthless, without saying the word out loud. Excuses that told me her comfort mattered more than my dignity, that her marriage was worth my humiliation. And I would nod, biting down on the acid burning up my throat, letting it eat away at the parts of me that still remembered who I used to be. I would tell myself over and over like a broken prayer. This is what mothers do. This is what love means. Endure. Stay quiet. Fade if you must. Because I thought if I stayed small enough, silent enough, invisible enough, maybe they'd still want me there. Maybe love meant making yourself easy to carry, even when your heart felt too heavy for your own ribs to hold. But I didn't realize back then every time I chose silence, and every time I swallowed my hurt without letting it touch the air between us, every time I nodded and looked away and told myself, it doesn't matter. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was teaching them something far more dangerous, that I didn't deserve to exist, that I was nothing but background noise, a shadow in their bright, perfect home, a ghost of the woman who once believed she was allowed to take up space in this world. And as I sit here now, staring at my reflection in their gleaming kitchen window, seeing only the outline of a woman worn thin by gratitude she never owed them, I finally understand silence isn't love, it's surrender. And I think I'm done surrendering. Dinner was silent, heavy. The only sound was Mark's spoon scraping against the plate metal, grating on ceramic harsh and relentless like teeth-grinding bone. I had spent all afternoon making his favorite chicken pot pie. I rolled the dough with trembling hands, diced vegetables, until my knuckles ached, hoping stupidly, hoping it would soften him. Julia sat across from me, eyes glued to her phone screen, her face illuminated in the cold glow, blank and unreachable. Mark sipped his beer without tasting it, eyes locked on the table jaw, clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Then he spoke, without looking up, his voice calm, too calm. A blade dipped in honey. You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. My chest tightened like a vice. My lungs burned with the effort to breathe. What do you mean? I managed to whisper, though the words felt rusted and broken in my mouth. He set his beer down with a quiet thud. Deliberate. Final. Then he raised his gaze to mine. Empty. Flat. Cold as winter pavement. I mean, how long is this supposed to go on, Eleanor? He drawled my name like an insult. You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills. We didn't sign up to feed extra mouths. His words punched through me like iron. Feed. Mouths. Like I was nothing but another stray mutt cluttering his pristine life, gnawing at scraps he deemed worthless. I turned to Julia, panic scraping up my throat, silent pleas clawing for freedom. Julia. Her name cracked on my tongue like glass shattering. She didn't look up, didn't flinch. Her thumb kept scrolling mechanical and lifeless. When she spoke, her voice was flat, dead. Maybe it's best if you find somewhere else. For everyone's sake. Everyone's sake. The phrase roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. My vision blurred at the edges, colors smearing into a gray void. My own daughter, my blood. My reason to keep breathing couldn't even meet my eyes as she handed me my death sentence. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I stood up. My knees wobbled under the crushing weight of humiliation, but I forced them straight. I forced myself to move, to walk. Each step down the narrow hallway echoed like a gunshot in an execution chamber. I reached my room and pulled open the closet door with trembling hands, grabbed my battered suitcase from under the bed. I began folding my life away in silence. Shirts stained with tears I never let them see. Sweaters still faintly scented with my dead husband's cologne. The only man who ever called me home. Photographs of birthdays and hospital visits and graduations they never cared to frame. Each item felt heavier than stone, saturated with betrayal and grief. My chest felt carved hollow. My heart thrashed against bone, desperate to find an exit that didn't exist. Mark's voice drifted down the hall, casual, cruel, dripping with indifference. She'll be out by morning. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound ripped through the silent room like a scream. Like my own throat tearing open in agony I refused to release. I dragged my suitcases through the living room. Mark didn't look up. Julia pretended to text, her thumb trembling ever so slightly. Not enough to betray guilt, just enough to remind me she was human once. No one stopped me. No one called my name. No one reached out. The cold night slapped my face as I stepped outside. Darkness swallowed me whole. Streetlights flickered overhead, buzzing with fluorescent indifference. I dragged my suitcases to the curb knees, locking against the urge to collapse. I sat down the pavement, biting into my bones. I waited. I waited for Julia to come running out, barefoot tears, streaming to say, "Mom, wait. I'm sorry. Please don't go." But the door never opened. No footsteps pounded down the walkway. No voice cracked the night to save me. There was nothing. Just silence. Just the distant hum of traffic and the icy wind tearing through my thin coat. I was just a shadow on the pavement. A ghost discarded before death could claim me. A corpse still breathing out of stubbornness alone. Tears slid down my face, hot and silent, carving tracks through the grime and despair. Endless, unstoppable. And in that moment, as headlights blurred past and my breath fogged in the winter air, I realized something brutal and final. I hadn't just lost my home. I had lost the only person I thought would never throw me away. I always believed betrayal came with screaming and shattered plates and slammed doors. But now I knew the truth. Sometimes betrayal comes quietly. Sometimes it sounds like dinner plates clinking. Like your daughter, refusing to look you in the eye as she erases you from her life. Sometimes betrayal is silent. Sometimes it's just them letting you leave. And no one caring enough to call you back. The motel room smelled like mold and failure. The peeling wallpaper curled at the edges like dying leaves. I lay there for days staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of broken neon lights outside my window, wondering how it felt to matter to someone. Anyone. My phone stayed silent. Julia didn't call. Mark, of course, never would. My daughter had carved me out of her life like I was a tumor she needed to cut away. One evening, I pulled out the old box of keepsakes I'd carried with me, the last scraps of a life I once called mine. At the very bottom was a small leather diary, cracked and faded with age. My mother's. I opened it not expecting anything. Just words about groceries, whether her arthritis, mundane sentences scribbled by a woman long gone. But as I flipped further, her voice began to change. The ink pressed harder, the lines shaking. Secrets spilled across the pages like dark blood. He came again today. HJS said he wished things were different, that he could marry me. But he has a family, a name to protect. Eleanor must never know. My chest tightened. HJS. The initials meant nothing at first, until they did. I kept reading. Page after page of stolen afternoons, hushed meetings in cheap hotels, envelopes of cash she tried to refuse. Then he promised me, if anything happened to him, Eleanor would have something. A trust. A letter. His lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, would know. Mr. Goldstein. My hands trembled. The name echoed in my mind like a threat or a prayer. I spent the next 2 days in the motel's sticky computer room, searching, scrolling, barely breathing. And there he was, Leonard Goldstein, retired estate lawyer, Dallas. I didn't call. I couldn't. Fear kept my fingers frozen. Instead, I wrote him a letter. Desperate, pathetic, ink smudged with tears I refused to let fall. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. I always wondered if you'd reach out, he said. His voice was gravel and grief. There's something you need to see. The next morning, I boarded a Greyhound bus to Dallas, my suitcase half packed, in case he turned out to be a scam. But when I stepped into his silent office lined with books older than my pain, I knew it was real. He slid an envelope across the polished oak table, yellowed with time, fragile. I tore it open with shaking hands. To my daughter, Eleanor Louise. My vision blurred. Tears pricked at the edges, but I blinked them back. I needed to see every word with brutal clarity. I am sorry for everything. For loving your mother in secret. For leaving her in the shadows. For leaving you. But know this. In the event of my death, I have insured a portion of my personal assets, untraceable through my estate, are to be delivered to you via Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood. Though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death. Mr. Goldstein pushed a folder toward me. Inside were bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds, over $1 million. I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I just sat there numb, letting the truth sink into my bones like an old infection finally surfacing. They threw me out like garbage. They thought I was finished. But what they didn't know was that buried beneath their contempt was something bigger than their pity, bigger than their cruelty power. I walked out of that office with nothing but a silent vow echoing in my chest. They erased me. Now I'll show them what happens when you try to bury a woman who knows exactly where the bodies are hidden. Because the truth wasn't just freedom. It was a loaded gun. And I was done playing nice. I didn't go back to Austin right away. I couldn't. Something inside me had cracked open, and the woman crawling out was someone I barely recognized. For days, I wandered the silent streets of Dallas drinking burnt coffee from gas stations, staring at people who passed me without a glance. Businessmen in crisp suits, mothers dragging toddlers, teen girls laughing into their phones, all of them living lives untouched by the rot of betrayal. But I wasn't jealous anymore. I was studying them, learning how people carried power without ever needing to raise their voices. I checked into a quiet short-term rental downtown. Modern, minimal, cold. I started spending nights hunched over a borrowed laptop searching keywords I never thought I'd type: LLC formation, anonymous property purchase, shell corporations. Each click felt like sharpening a blade. Each new term learned was another bullet tucked into my pocket. I didn't want to build an empire. I just wanted to make sure no one ever had the power to throw me out again. Then one midnight, my screen flickered to a real estate auction site. Listings rolled by in sterile font until one stopped my breath cold. East Austin, distress sale, owner default, auction scheduled in 14 days. I clicked it. My pulse thundered in my ears. It was their building. The same cracked apartment complex where Mark kicked me out like rotting trash. The same hallways where Julia couldn't look me in the eye as I dragged my suitcases out into the cold. I sat there in the dark staring at the screen, feeling something deep and primal rise in my chest. Not joy, not vengeance, something older, like justice with no mercy. I called Mr. Goldstein at dawn. My voice didn't tremble. I want it, I said. And just like that, the gears turned. He created an LLC under my mother's name, a tribute she'd never know. We transferred funds, filed paperwork, placed the bid. It was silent, legal, invisible. 2 weeks later, I won. No one cheered. There were no flowers, no applause. Just a quiet email at 3 a.m. confirming the deed had been transferred to ML Holdings. I stared at the screen, my reflection ghost-like against its glow. I own it. I own them. Mark and Julia had no idea. To them, I was still the pathetic old woman sitting on a motel bed, crying into cold takeout. They didn't know that while they slept, I bought the roof over their heads. And as I sat there in the silence of my small rental, the sun rising gray and indifferent over Dallas, I whispered aloud, Let's see how Mark likes paying rent to a mouth he couldn't feed. Because this wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. And I wasn't coming back as the mother they discarded. I was coming back as the storm they never saw coming. The day the rent notices went out, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the email confirming delivery to every tenant in the building. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the steam burn my lips just enough to remind me I was alive. For most tenants, the increase was modest, a fair adjustment for improvements I planned. But for Mark and Julia, it was triple. Not double, triple. Market rate plus every overdue fee and penalty their unit had accumulated under negligent ownership. I didn't need to be there to see Mark's reaction. I could feel it, the hot red fury, the sputtering disbelief, the slam of his beer bottle against the table as he roared at Julia. 2 days later, Julia called me. Her name lit up my phone screen for the first time in months. I watched it ring out silent. Her voicemail came minutes after Mom. I don't know if you've heard, but our rent just shot up. Like a lot. Mark's freaking out. I don't know. Can we talk? I didn't call back. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. A week later, the property manager forwarded me Mark's furious email. Subject rent increase. This is extortion. We've lived here for 3 years and never been late once. You can't do this. We'll take legal action if necessary. I read it 3 times. Each word was dipped in arrogance, every sentence reeking of entitlement. I forwarded it to my lawyer with a simple note, standard clause, C. No exceptions. That night I drove by the building. Their window glowed dim in the darkness. Through the thin curtains I saw shadows. Julia pacing. Mark gesturing wildly, his hands cutting the air like blades. His rage filled the room like poison gas. Julia's shoulders curled in on themselves, as if trying to disappear. I watched them for a moment, engine idling, headlights off. The street was empty, silent, but for the hum of distant traffic. Part of me felt hollow. Another part felt vindicated. But beneath it all was an ache so deep, it almost split me open. Because even now, knowing what I knew, holding what I held, I would have given anything for Julia to open that window, look down at me and say, "Come home, Mom." But she didn't. She never would. So I drove away. In the weeks that followed, I signed off on renovations, new locks, repainted hallways, security cameras installed at every entrance. Mark raged louder with every notice posted to his door. He began slipping angry notes under the property office door. The water pressure sucks. Trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke. I instructed the manager to ignore them. Meanwhile, Julia stopped calling. She texted instead short, fractured messages. "Hey, can we talk? Please, I need you." I read them at night, lying on my clean white sheets in my quiet rented apartment, staring at the ceiling fan whirring softly above me. I never replied, because silence was no longer weakness. It was my blade. And every day Mark woke up under my roof, every bill he paid. To my name, every curse he spat into the void, with no one listening. The blade twisted a little deeper. They thought I was gone, that they had buried me in shame and silence. But they never understood a woman like me doesn't die quietly. She learns the language of power. She wraps her scars around her like armor. And then she watches silent, patient, merciless, as the world that threw her away begins to crumble under her gaze. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. And Mark was finally learning what it felt like to fall. It was raining the night Julia showed up at my door. Thin, relentless rain that hissed against the window panes like a warning. The knock was soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. I opened the door and there she stood, my daughter, my traitor. My blood soaked to the bone, hair clinging to her face. mascara bleeding black trails down her cheeks. In her hands, she clutched a grocery bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. Her voice was shredded hoarse from crying or from screaming. I couldn't tell. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly dripping water onto my clean hardwood floors. I handed her a towel. She took it with trembling hands, eyes darting around my apartment, at the neat bookshelves, the quiet lamps, the untouched dinner cooling on the table. "It's nice here," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. I said nothing. She sat down at my kitchen table like a prisoner waiting for judgment. The silence between us roared louder than any accusation. Finally, she spoke. "He's Mark's. He's not who I thought he was." I stayed quiet, staring at her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders curled inward like a burned paper. She twisted her fingers together until her knuckles went white. I thought if I kept the peace, if I stayed quiet, he'd come around. But he's getting worse. The rent increased, the notices, he's blaming me for everything. For you. For his life. Still, I didn't speak. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. "I let him kick you out," she whispered. I stood there and let him. I thought if you left, he'd calm down. That he'd see me again. That he'd love me again. Her words stabbed through my chest, sharp and clean. But the pain didn't surprise me anymore. It was an old friend by now. I took a slow breath, choosing each word like a blade. "You didn't just let him, Julia. You stood with him." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tears fell faster, dripping onto the table between us. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, voice cracking. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be yours again." My chest ached so fiercely, it felt like my ribs might splinter. Part of me wanted to reach out to brush the wet hair from her face, to pull her into my arms and tell her she was safe. But the other part, the part built from every sleepless night in that rotten motel room, every breath I dragged in through tears and shame and loneliness, that part stayed silent, because I knew the truth. Forgiveness isn't mercy. Sometimes it's just another way to let yourself be killed. I stared at her, at the girl I raised, at the woman who let me die, in silence. Finally, I spoke. "Do you want my forgiveness, Julia? Or do you just want to stop feeling guilty?" She sobbed then, shoulders shaking under the towel. Her voice came out strangled. I want my mom back." A silence settled over us. Heavy. Final. I thought of Mark pacing their apartment like a trapped animal, searching for someone to blame. I thought of Julia curled up on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., crying silently into her knees. I thought of myself sitting on that curb, in the freezing dark with 2 suitcases, and no name left to call my own. And I realized I could forgive her. I could gather her up and let her bury her face in my neck and whisper, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." Or I could end it here. Sever the tie forever. Let the past rot where it lay. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw both possibilities glimmer in her tear-soaked eyes. Then I reached out my hand hovering above hers, shaking with rage and grief and love, twisted into something unrecognizable. "Go home, Julia," I said softly. "Whatever that word means to you now." She choked on a sob, nodded, and stood up on unsteady legs. She clutched the grocery bag to her chest as she walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back one last time. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry." I didn't answer. I didn't nod. I didn't move. She left. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing the silence in with me. I sat there long after she was gone, staring at the empty chair where she'd sat, feeling the war raging inside me, with no victor in sight. Because mercy is a choice, and tonight I wasn't sure if I had any left. The morning I decided to end it, the sky was gunmetal gray. No sun, no promise of warmth, just the cold certainty of a world that no longer needed mercy. I sat by the window sipping bitter black coffee, reading Mark's latest email for the 5th time. The subject line screamed in capital letters, "You think you can ruin me." His words dripped venom, frantic and desperate. "I know what you're doing. Raising our rent, targeting me. You think you're untouchable. I'll find out who you are. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." Each sentence wrapped around my chest like barbed wire. I closed my laptop with quiet precision. That was it. The moment. The switch flipping inside me from restraint to finality. For months I had watched him unravel. Watched his arrogance rot into fear. Watched him pace that crumbling apartment like a rabid dog gnawing its own tail. But now it was time to end the game. I called my lawyer. My voice was calm, so lethal. "File it," I said. "Everything." Within hours, Mark received a cease and desist letter. Attached were copies of every threatening email he sent. Screenshots of falsified documents he'd submitted under a fake law firm letterhead to intimidate the property office. Audio recordings of his public rants laced with slurs and threats. Maintenance sabotage logs. Tenant complaints about his aggression, all neatly compiled into one airtight package. He didn't respond for 2 days. On the 3rd day, Julia called. Her voice shook so hard I could barely understand her. "He's gone," she whispered. "Packed his bags while I was at work. Left a note saying he was being hunted, that you ruined his life." I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. "Mom." Her voice cracked. Did you do this?" I closed my eyes, feeling the silence stretch between us like a blade. "No, Julia," I said finally. "He did this to himself." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet, staring out at the storm clouds gathering over the city. Rain began to fall in harsh, slanted lines, streaking down the glass like tears I no longer knew how to shed. Mark was gone. Disappeared into whatever dark hole men like him crawl into when the world finally turns on them. But I wasn't done. I walked to my bedroom, opened my closet, and pulled out the leather-bound journal that had resurrected me. My mother's voice whispered from its pages, a ghost, reminding me who I was before they tried to erase me. I slipped it into my purse, put on my coat, stepped out into the rain. As I walked down the street, cold drops soaking my hair, I felt the weight of the years I had spent on my knees lift from my shoulders. I felt taller, harder, colder. Mark thought he could break me with silence, but silence was where I found my power. He thought he could bury me with shame, but shame was the forge that built my armor. He thought he was the storm, but he was only the thunder. I was the lightning, and now I had struck. That night, as the rain hammered the city into submission, I sat by my window watching the dark streets glow with wet neon. My tea grew cold in my hands. My reflection stared back at me, a woman with nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to fear. I whispered into the darkness, "Rest well, Mark. You were never my equal. You were just an obstacle I chose to step over." And with that, I closed the chapter. Not with forgiveness, not with pity, but with the clean final silence of a blade sliding back into its sheath after the kill. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclamation, about knowing that in the end it wasn't his screams or his threats that defined him. It was my silence, and my silence would haunt him until the day he died. Days passed, then weeks. The world kept spinning with its indifferent hum. Birds still sang at dawn. Cars still choked the streets at rush hour. People still laughed into their phones, unaware of how easily a life could unravel into nothing. Julia called again. This time I answered. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its old softness. "Mom, he's really gone." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say about Mark. He was a chapter, closed with cold precision. She inhaled shakily. I moved out of the apartment, got a studio near work. It's small, but it's mine. I could hear tears pricking her words, but she didn't let them fall. Not this time. I don't know how to be your daughter again. Silence thickened between us, heavy as wet cement. I stared at the steam curling from my untouched mug of tea, thinking of all the nights I whispered her name into the darkness, praying for her to come back to me. And now, here she was across a chasm I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. Finally, I spoke. My words came out quiet, but each syllable cut clean. "You don't need to be my daughter again, Julia. You just need to be someone I can trust." She sobbed then, not loudly, just a small broken sound that slipped through the phone like a wounded animal. "I don't know if I can fix what I did," she whispered. I closed my eyes, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something close. Something like the memory of love, faded and tattered, but still there if I chose to look. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed," I said softly. "Some things are meant to be learned from." She cried harder. The sound was ragged, scraping raw against my heart. "I miss you, Mom." My chest ached so fiercely I thought my ribs might snap. I wanted to tell her I missed her too, that I'd trade every dollar, every building, every quiet victory, just to hold her again, without resentment coiling in my gut. But I didn't, because I wasn't sure it would be true. Instead, I said the only words I could give her. "Take care of yourself, Julia." She breathed out a shuddering sigh of grief and relief tangled together. "Goodbye, Mom." We hung up. I sat there in the silent apartment staring at my reflection in the window. Outside, dusk bled into night, washing the world in blue shadows. For the first time in months, I let the tears fall. They rolled down my cheeks, silently tasting of salt and ashes. Because forgiveness isn't always an open door. Sometimes it's a locked gate with no key. Sometimes it's letting someone go so completely that their name no longer feels like a wound. That night, I lit a single candle by my bedside. I opened my mother's diary to the last page and wrote 4 words in the margin for Julia to read. "Someday I loved you anyway." Then I closed it, turned off the light, and lay down in the quiet dark. Outside, the city pulsed with life I no longer needed to chase. Inside, my chest felt hollow but peaceful. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose who deserved my love. The freedom to walk away without looking back. The freedom to finally lay my burdens down and whisper into the darkness, "I am done." And to know with absolute, quiet certainty that for the first time in my life, done didn't mean broken. It meant whole. The message haunted me for days. Blood debts don't die with the men who owed them. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my apartment felt like it was breathing. Every knock at the door sounded like death coming to collect. 3 days later, an envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, my mother smiling softly in a cheap motel room. I didn't recognize her hair pinned back neatly. Sitting beside her was a man I'd only seen in yellowed newspaper clippings, Harold James Sterling HJS himself. But it wasn't them that froze my blood. It was the child standing between them, no more than 4 years old. A boy with Harold's eyes and my mother's dark hair. Someone had circled the boy's face in red ink. Underneath, scribbled in jagged handwriting, "He's been waiting longer than you've been alive, and now he wants what was promised." My hands shook so violently the photo slipped to the floor. I stared down at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. All this time I thought I was the only secret he left behind. But Harold James Sterling had another child, another heir, another shadow, and now he was coming for me. I clenched my jaw, feeling the old rage ignite in my chest like wildfire. Let him come. I whispered